Welcome to Let's Talk Under the Tree. We got Jazzy J, Mr. J himself, Mr. John Miller. What it do, fam?
Hey, what's going on, brothers? What's going on?
We got also T Smalls. Let's Talk Under the Tree. What they say, T?
Let's talk under the tree.
Hit the rewind button and do it again. What they say, T?
Let's talk under the tree.
Mr. John Miller, Professor Benedict College, Columbia, South Carolina. Pitfield Road, 843 in the house.
That's right, 843. Stand up.
The Low Country, Moncks Corner, South Carolina. And we're going to get this thing started. And thanks for joining us today, man. And, we enjoy your time and we appreciate you.
Hey, right back at you. It's a blessing, brother.
Right.
Thank you.
Going straight to it, we're going to cut the fat, as Mr. T Smalls always say.
That's right.
I seen you doing a rally in Charleston, and I say, you're my kind of guy. That, I'm seeing you in a different realm as an adult, not a little boy no more. So, of course,
That was just 5 minutes ago. That was just 5 minutes ago.
5 minutes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And when I seen you, did that rally, I said, wow, he has evolved. And I also said, I want to get you on here to talk to you, from your views in the education realm. What have you experienced? I'm going to start it off with the University of South Carolina.
Okay.
You went there as an undergrad. Have you experienced any racism there, any funny acting or things of that nature when you were going to school as an undergrad?
Actually, not really. I mean, of course, like everybody, undergrad is designed by the way it is to be a new experience. And so I went from being a big fish in a small pond, right, at Berkeley High School. We won 2 state championships for the record. All right, 94, 96.
Okay.
Let people know. All right, the best run in Berkeley High School football history was 1994 through 1996. Me and my boys got 2 of them. Okay, that's for the record. Okay, all right. Just I know. Listen, send all the letters to Jacksonville. All right.
Yeah.
All right. But all jokes aside, my experience at Carolina was one to where, like everybody, it's a learning experience. And so there's although African Americans are a minority at Carolina, it's a large minority considering that the school is a school of roughly 30,000. And so, I always felt as though I had a community of people. Several of my homeboys from Berkeley went to school with me. And so we had a good time there and we bonded together as a group. So I enjoyed my undergraduate experience. But looking back at it, right, I did the 10-year run. Now, when I left high school, I didn't know I was going to do the 10-year run, but that's just what the Lord had for me, where I did undergrad, master's, PhD. And so I went to high school in 97 and I came out in 2007 as Dr. Miller. So in that run, looking back at it, I realized after the fact there were a lot of things I wished that I would have received that I wondered, looking back at it, why didn't I get them? Right. And that's always when you get a little bit more perspective, you realize not what you saw at the time, but you realize maybe I could have got more. Were there certain opportunities that maybe I could have had that people didn't present to me, or maybe I just wasn't ready at the time. So again, man, I didn't have anything in particular, but I know every little piece of the journey helped, motivate me to be who I am today.
As a little kid, we used to always hear in the community, they used to say, boy, Jay smart as hell. I'm keeping it real. I used to say, and they used to always say, Jay smart as hell. And you used to hear a lot of the old folks say,
Hey, I don't know, man. Listen, it's crazy because when I think back, okay, so this is a quick story. So, by the way, I appreciate it. I really do. I would not be who I am today if it wasn't for, of course, our elders, right? So my grandmama gave me a lot of a head start. I had a big head start because I was the youngest in my house. My house was Eddie, Carol, Dwayne, Wanda, then me. Right. And so as the youngest, you get all of the advantages of watching all of the oldest before you. You learn what not to do to get a whooping. Right. You learn the things that are rewarded. But I had a lot of help. And so my grandmother taught me and gave me a head start before I even went to school. So I got involved in that academic and creative enrichment, the ACE program. And I was in one of the first classes of the ACE program. Myself and Kieran Kennedy and a few others. And now Kieran Kennedy's Dr. Kennedy. He's a radiologist out in Tampa. Shout out to my best friend and my brother, Kieran. And so if it wouldn't have been for us getting that advantage and doing the ACE program where we would be taken out of regular classes and having a chance to do creative things early on, I don't know if I would be where I am today. but my grandmother gave me a big head start by teaching me math and how to write before I even went to school. So even before going
Wow.
to school, I used to help my grandmother bid on Price is Right.
Come
That's how I
on.
learned math. Right?
What?
I did the
I used
same
to help my
thing.
grandmother bid
I
on
did the
prices
same
right.
thing.
And so, it helped, but she had to teach me how to bid. And so when
Right.
I look back at it and her teaching me how to bid, she would teach me how to read the clock. So I knew to tell her 15 minutes before her show came on. And so
Mhm.
when you really do think about all of those things that sometimes we lose when, we have a new day where everybody's busy, people working 2 or 3 jobs, a lot of us are now away from our parents or grandparents. And so we don't have that type of childcare anymore. We lose some things. And so I certainly am a beneficiary of great love and teaching from my grandmother and others, and good training from the Berkeley County School District. So again, man, it's been a blessing. But the story I wanted to get to real quick was, it's funny that you mentioned that, because when I was a kid, I was just the little person, right? Like
Yeah.
I was always the little person running around everybody. And so in running around everybody, it gave me an identity early on that I might not be as big and strong as everybody, but I can help you in school if you need it. And that was one of those small things, man. It might have saved me from getting beat up a couple times. It might have helped me. Eventually, I grew into an athlete and I kind of caught up with everybody. But early on, it was a good thing to I could help people with homework on the bus riding home.
Right. Your grandmother, speaking of your grandmother, I've never seen your grandmother mad. Has she ever was mad around you or angry?
So
I've
listen,
never seen it. She's always smiling.
please believe I got some of that switch now. So yes, let's just go and put that.
Miss Daisy gave
Hey,
you the switch.
hey, he said
please,
the switch.
please believe I got some of that switch now. I ain't get as much as my older cousins, because I used to tell on them. That's how you avoid the switch. You just tell. But no, all jokes aside, man, I miss my grandmother dearly and try to live up to her legacy. But my grandmother's legacy that I remember is that my wife and I, we try to be a hospitable home.
Mhm.
So one of our gifts is we like to host, and we are warm people, because my grandmother never met a stranger. Like
Oh
I
yeah.
remember watching her for her whole life. Anybody came over the house when she was well, and in her older years when her health was declining. It didn't even matter if it was the nurse coming to assist her. Whoever came in the house, she would say the same thing. Oh boy, or oh girl, you look so delicious.
That's
Come on
right.
over here and let me get some sugar. Like that was her saying. She'd be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you look so delicious," and then she'd hug the person. And so, those were formative years for me. And so, we try to instill that in our children, that we want to be welcoming, because that's a sign of God's love, that you can be welcoming. But again, humble beginnings. I really am appreciative. I wouldn't have rather grown up nowhere other than Kitfield Road in Moncks Corner, South
That's
Carolina.
right. That's right.
And so, it was a blessing, man.
Let me ask you this. I didn't realize this until I got older. What year you said your grandmother was born?
I think Grandmama was born. Don't get me wrong. I'm gonna feel bad if I get it wrong, but I believe Grandmama's birthday was either 1916 or 1919. But she was a 19 teens birth.
That's correct. That's about right. And I didn't realize until I got older that their grandparents were slaves.
Yeah. And
You
so,
know,
yeah.
yes.
So let me.
And our
Oh,
grandparents, we grew up around them, and we
right.
never really maybe thought about it. But their grandparents were slaves.
Yeah, so let me give you how I see that now, thinking
Hmm.
about how something that we both experienced as kids, because I'm sure at some point your parents or somebody went down to the Joy Hill classroom,
That's
right?
correct.
If I mention the Joy Hill classroom, anybody from Kitfield or the Moncks Corner area they know about this little small shack in the
Hmm.
middle of the woods in Kitfield, that when you were a kid, all you heard about it was it's the classroom.
Right.
And I would always wonder, why was the church called the classroom? But then think
Hmm.
about it. Our church used to be the classroom and everything else. And
Hmm.
so last week, when I was giving my remarks, when I was speaking to the crowd in Charleston, when I was speaking about, challenging us to do better as far as coming together as a community on these
Hmm.
issues, I was referring to the spirit of the Joy Hill classroom. I remember those revivals where I was a kid and be like, we going to revival, and you'd be like, oh, it's the longest, hottest night ever. Everybody packed
Hmm.
into that little small room, right? It
Yeah.
definitely was in the age before coronavirus, because we was packed up in there. But the
Yep.
point of it all is that was something that was put together by poor people who
Yeah.
did what they could to gain their strength together in the Lord and overcome. And so we
Hmm.
are the beneficiaries of that. And so again, man, it's just a subtle reminder of how people came together in our community growing up. We it's funny when I look back at it, boy, we were poor. But when I grew up, I didn't think I
Hmm.
was poor. We had
Correct.
everything we needed.
Correct.
We had
Correct.
everything we needed. And so in having everything that you need, it's almost kind of like what Chris Rock said with the big TV. You don't know you got a big TV. You don't know you got a small TV till you see somebody with a big TV. right?
Yeah, I remember that.
It kind of gives you an idea. So to us, that 13-inch TV was big. You know, it was the
It
TV on
was.
top of the TV, or it was these things that we knew we were okay. We didn't miss a meal, and we were fine. And so when you get older, you just really are appreciative of how much our grandparents and our parents really did to make sure that we were afloat.
Speaking of the classroom, let me tell you a story. You know, I might have been in the fourth grade. I wasn't used to all this testifying and all this, so I got scared. So I
Right.
ran I ran the hell out of there on the dirt road. Somebody came up to me and I said, "Well, it felt like his beard maybe Jesus or something. Somebody had a beard all in my ear, so I was a little scared back,
Right.
of the classroom back then."
But no, but seriously, but think about it. Let's be real for just a second. Now we
Mhm.
under the tree, right? So
Right.
think about the beauty in that. So what
Hmm.
I'm wrestling with is, my wife and our first boy was born in Arkansas, and so
Hmm.
I appreciated my time in Arkansas. It was 10 years there. One of the
Hmm.
reasons why I liked Little Rock is it kind of reminded me a little bit like Charleston. It had a
Hmm.
nice black white mix. However, some of the cultural differences, I thought we had a little bit more richer cultural history in Charleston, obviously with all of the roots in Charleston.
Hmm. Hmm.
All that's to say, one of the things that was so rich about the Joy Hill classroom and all those other things is that we saw Black empowerment, right? We saw people who were in leadership positions
Hmm.
leading, and we had neighbors who were people who were, you knew who your electrician was, who your plumber
Hmm.
was. These were professional people, your teachers. And so, one of the things that I won't say we're lacking, but we don't have as much of a concentration is that all of our resources are no longer in with the place we were born, right?
That's correct.
So,
Right.
I'm not in Moncks Corner right now because there are no social work programs for me to run in the
Hmm.
Charleston area.
Hmm.
So, College of Charleston, Citadel, all of the major schools in the area, aside from Trident Technical College, do
Hmm.
not have social work programs. So, for me as a
Hmm.
professor, I just cannot do my job in the Low Country. And so, when we are not in the areas where we're from, that flight, that's the term that's used by academicians, that flight takes our resources away from our community. So now in that same community that birth us and all of the different gifts that we have, we can help our community by trying to help the next generation or do whatever we can to help them, assist them, inspire them. But it's not the same as if we were still in that neighborhood and building up our own wealth in those neighborhoods. And so that's one of those things to where I don't know what the answer is for that. I'm not going to pretend that I do, but I do know that that's one of the reasons why perhaps we're not progressing as a people as quickly as we could because so many of our resources are no longer where are from.
So now you're at Benedict College, Columbia, South Carolina, at the HBCU.
Yeah, no doubt.
Is it a different vibe at the school,
Yes.
or a different vibe, or a different type of pride?
It's a different vibe and different type of pride. So I never, prior to coming to be a part of the faculty at Benedict College, all of my matriculation was through predominantly white institutions, right?
Hmm.
So when I went to University of South Carolina, went to University of Tennessee, those are big schools,
Hmm.
state anchor schools, and then I spent 10 years on the faculty at the University of Arkansas. So all of my career had been in predominantly white institutions.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. Once I got the job at Benedict College to lead as department chair, here's one of the things I realized early is that I think that sometimes when you don't have a certain experience, it helps. Maybe God is creating you to be the right person at the right time.
Hmm.
So everything's about timing. So I had not grown up in an quote unquote HBCU environment. I had always wanted to. I had friends who had experiences at other schools, people who I knew went to Benedict when I was at Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. But somehow throughout my career, where my scholarship went, I eventually grew into a scholar who would write books
Hmm.
on African Americans. And I was driven to do work about my community because I was in environments where I knew there was more necessary. So when
Hmm.
I was at Tennessee working on my dissertation, I knew it was important for me to do stuff on African Americans because there
Hmm.
just were not a lot of researchers doing it.
Hmm.
All of that made me, I think, a better, more well equipped department chair once I arrived at Benedict, because not only could I tell the students and teach them what they needed to know in terms of their HBCU experience, but I could tell them, okay, if you decide to leave here, I want you to be good enough to go anywhere. If you want to go to a sister HBCU, go to a sister HBCU. But my job is to prepare you to be good enough to be able to go anywhere you want to go. If you want to go to Morehouse, you want to go to Clark, you want to go to wherever you want to go. You want to go to J.C. Smith up the road in Charlotte, I'll support you. And I've written many letters of recommendation. But I can honestly tell you, I think that I am a better prepared person to do the work I'm doing today because I've seen so many different things. I can call out the stuff that we're doing that we probably need to improve. And then I can also recognize the areas where students are getting a certain nurturing that they would not get at another school that makes it that much more likely for them to be successful going down the road. So it's been a blessing to see it both ways. Uh, think about it like this. When I was at Arkansas, I taught about 400 students who were students who I would call, John Miller disciples. They had me in a
Mm-hmm.
major class for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Those 400 students were a bigger yield. I probably won't get 400 students at Benedict over the course of my time here in terms of that close of a
Mm-hmm.
level, but I have a much richer product here.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a bigger yield in Arkansas, but it's a much more precious resource. Almost think about it like I went from coal to something maybe like plutonium, because the kids in Benedict, when they get out and they graduate, most likely from a lot of our student population demographics, they're going to be going into a realm that's going to alter their family course for generations. And so I take it with pride. And social work, my field in particular, we have a dramatic lack of African Americans with their master's degrees and licenses in social work. So getting them across that first hurdle puts them in that better of an opportunity to go forward. Very proud of the fact that in the past 2 years, we've had 32 graduates of our program with the BSW degree, Bachelor of Social Work. Of those 32, 20 are either enrolled in graduate school or currently in graduate school right now, or have been accepted for graduate school. So
Wow.
our hit rate in terms of the students graduating and going on is one of the more proud things I've done in my time at BC.
I have a question for you. What year did you graduate Berkeley? 96, 97?
97.
97. Now you're a professor at a college. Okay, we had some, when we grew up, some structure. Okay, moving right along years later, say 20 years later or whatever. Do you think the kids that you teach now have a style like they're raising themselves? No
Oof.
structure, no structure, no manners.
Mm.
And you're having a hard time performing in the classroom because they have no structure because their parents basically the same age as them, partying, smoking weed, drinking, and so forth.
I'll say this: structure is important, but I think expectations override structure.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a student. She actually just graduated this year, so I won't
Mm-hmm.
say her name
Okay,
is, but
okay, okay.
let's just call this student Candy, because I have
Mm-hmm.
no student named Candy. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
all
Mm-hmm.
right, all right. Well, nobody to be like, who he talking about? Okay, it's a made up name.
All
And
right.
so Candy went to a school where I remember her being in my office a year ago, and she was struggling. She was having a hard moment. It's not uncommon for juniors and seniors to have a little bit of that. Can I really make it? When they
Mm-hmm.
get to the end, because of the pressure of it's real now when you're getting ready to finish with your degree. She went to a high school in a certain part of the state that
Mm-hmm.
is that she had embraced the idea that even though she had a good high school GPA, it didn't mean nothing because her school was trash.
Mm-hmm.
And so she
Wow.
told me that one day in the office. So
Mm-hmm.
when she told me that, I told her, who told you this? Like, how do you believe this? And then she basically said, well, everybody know that's how it is. Now, what she said and what I heard were two different things. She said everybody know that's what it is. I heard it as this young lady struggles with poor community expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes in our communities, we have the expectation off the top. And you can insert in your mind right now a certain school you may know about that it's a high school or a certain area where you say, they don't do good over there. Or, they ain't going to be about nothing on that side of town. I did a talk, and I won't say where, but I
Mm-hmm.
had a paid engagement to go speak at an event where there were a lot of professional social workers there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was given an inspirational speech.
Mm-hmm.
During my inspirational speech, I remember hearing some of the people in the audience grumble because they were yelling out sides of town where they were like, he don't know nothing about X side of town, or he don't
Oh,
know about
okay.
my thing. And think about
Wow.
it, if the people who are supposed to be in these positions to
Mhm.
actually help children overcome
Mm-hmm.
themselves see it as a problem, then we ain't gonna never win this game. So yes, I think that students have a little bit more of an edge now today, but they're wrestling with a little bit of a tough hand because
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're coming up in environments where you mentioned earlier when I was a kid, people were saying, praying all around me, J Show is smart, J Show is smart. Somebody might have been saying, Candy ain't nothing, Candy gonna be just like her mama, Candy gonna be just like her daddy, Candy
All
gonna
right.
be just like her cousin. And
Mhm.
so that cycle, which is that cycle of breaking the cycle of poverty and low expectations, whenever we get to the point as a community to where we're serious about doing that, and I call out of course, systematic racism, but I
Mm-hmm.
also call us out about that too, because if you're in a community and you're doing well, but you're not reaching back,
Mm-hmm.
then you part of the problem, just like that area. So again, we got a ways to go.
Wow, that's amazing right there, bro. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm gonna ask you one more thing.
Yes, sir.
When you taught at the University of Arkansas for 10 years, give or
Yeah.
take. So now you're at Benedict. Did you have to change your style of teaching and your approach because you're at an HBCU compared to the University of Arkansas?
No, I put it to you like this. In year one, I'm going to my fourth year now, so I'll say
Hmm.
this with a little bit of confidence.
Okay.
In year one, there was you ever been around somebody, if you ever visited like somebody who you really serious in dating, and you go to their house for the first time,
Hmm.
and yeah, they offer you a plate, but they feeling you out.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like let me see how he really eat these greens. You know, like
Hmm.
Yeah,
let's see
yeah,
about it,
yeah.
right? So
Hmm.
I took it as I understood it, but then it was a challenge. But
Hmm.
to answer your question, no, one, I trust God, and I didn't choose Benedict. God sent me to Benedict. So I always make that plain. So when I
Hmm.
say I didn't choose Benedict, it's not any slight on the school, but I
Hmm.
live my life on mission. So
Hmm.
by living an on mission life mean, okay, God, whatever this next assignment is, I accept. Wherever you send me, I accept. I left Little Rock on a career high. I left Little Rock as the reigning social worker of the year
Hmm.
in a place of my career where it would have been very easy and convenient for me to just stay and ride that thing on out. But
Hmm.
God said, no, I want to send you home. So when God sent us back to Columbia, my wife's from Columbia. She's at
Hmm.
Columbia College now, and I'm at Benedict College.
Hmm.
Maybe God needed to bring some of South Carolina's brain capital back home,
Hmm.
right? And so
All right.
I look at it like that. So it was a little bit of a challenge in terms of maybe people not knowing if they could trust me. But if you're authentic over time, you build trust. And
Right.
so when students come to my office and I open the door for them, a lot of what they got from me, I think, was a little bit of a breath of fresh air, because since I had no history, I had no idea of what it used to be like. And so I took everything with a clean slate. And brother, I'm so proud to say, man, my program has doubled in size
Yeah.
under my 3 years there. So the majors are coming. We're having good results, and God's blessed the work.
Being from Moncks Corner, dirt road, cornfield, was that a major factor in your drive for success?
Yes,
Yes.
it
Yes.
was a major factor just because think about it. We grew up in the summertime. Only thing we had to do sometimes because it was so hot was just go outside and watch the heat come on the pavement, man. I mean,
Yep.
like for real, for real. We grew up without internet. Like nowadays, it's 300 channels on TV. Back in the day, brother, it was two, four, five, 7, and 24.
That's it.
Tho-
Look. And then after
Those
12, everything shut down.
so this was before digital TV. So we used to be inside, outside, and you couldn't go in or out but so much. So all of those lessons learned and the things that we did that stoked our creativity also was a drive to go and do further. But I just shared with somebody recently that despite where I now am, I can remember graduating high school, and since I didn't have anybody in my immediate family who had actually went to college that could show me the ropes,
Hmm.
I remember feeling, well, am I really going to make it? Because when you play football for Berkeley High School or you're an athlete, as African American men, we're often put into categories. You're
Hmm.
either a smart one or you're the athlete. Your ticket going to be one or the other. And so
Hmm.
since I was somebody who was an athlete, but I was also okay in school, it was this thing of, well, if you don't get a scholarship, what are you going to do? And so I very easily could have fallen through the cracks. But God made a way for me, and then I eventually got into school. But I didn't become a great college student until my junior year. My first 2 years of college, I struggled in college. I didn't have a sterling GPA. I, like everybody else, had to grow up and figure out what it's like to live far from home. Columbia is the big city when you're from
Hmm.
Moncks Corner.
Hmm.
So, learning how to adjust. But once I hit my stride, I just realized I couldn't see myself going home and feeling as though I didn't accomplish something. And so, lo and behold, man, God just ordered my steps.
You were in 2017 Arkansas Social Worker of the Year. Was that a unanimous decision?
They weren't I wasn't in the vote room, so I guess it was, but I put it to you like this. That work was a blessing, but it was a great gift. A lot of the
Hmm.
best gifts that God give you, they're not tangible. They're things that you couldn't ask for. And so it wasn't something I politic for or even expected, but one of my colleagues was a member of the board, and she let
Hmm.
me know that she was nominating me and let me know if I would accept the nomination. I said yes, and then to my surprise, I was honored with the achievement. So it was a bittersweet moment for me in my career. I won the award. The award was in part due for a lot of the non-service work I did. I spent
Hmm.
5 years working as president of the 100 Black Men of Greater Little Rock, and I also did a lot of work for the Joel Anderson Institute on Race and Ethnicity, which was a group where we went across the state to help communities overcome racial issues. And so I had spent a lot of time working in this small town, my adopted second hometown of Camden, Arkansas, and I helped them build one of the largest national night out events that was a community celebration in the state, if not the region. And so, in doing that work and the work with the 100 and the work at my institution, my colleagues around the state clearly thought it was worthy of the award. And so, I was very pleased and humbled and excited. But like I said, it was bittersweet because as I was receiving that award, I was also dealing with issues that would ultimately lead to me leaving the institution. And
Hmm.
so, sometimes it don't matter how much you shine, or sometimes when you do shine and really let people know how they feel, you can only shine but so much before people really let you know how they feel.
Mhm.
And so it was a good lesson to learn, but it was a very important time in my career. And again, man, it was a blessing.
When you were when you were at the University of Arkansas, African American professor, did you have to prove yourself with a higher double standard?
Yes, double standards are real. Right now, and I'd encourage everybody who listening to the podcast, watching the podcast, to do a search on Twitter, if you're on Twitter, and look for the hashtag Black in the Ivory. And
Hmm.
so what the Black in the Ivory is tales of professors and African Americans in academia telling their tale. The idea of behind or in the ivory tower or behind the ivory tower.
Hmm.
Higher education, big universities, colleges are known as the ivory tower, so to speak, intellectuals. And so behind the ivory tower, you would think that people are tend to be liberal. They have it's all about academics. It's about the pursuit of knowledge, and so therefore a lot of the issues that we deal with in the quote unquote real world should not be there. But the reality of it all is that's just not true. Racism exists, sexism exists, all of these different issues exist. And so my struggle as an African American professor at a school that was not HBCU, although I won't share, this is not the podcast or the time to do it now.
Hmm.
These issues are not just related to only schools that aren't HBCUs. But I will say that the issues I dealt with at my previous institution were issues of once you exceed people's expectations, they don't know how to take you after that.
Okay.
So that's what got me when I was at UA Little Rock is that I landed there and I was committed and I was all in, and my wife and I were able to establish ourselves in that community. However, the further we got more entrenched in the community, I'm not sure if those people who were watching, who were influential and enough to make it in a situation to where maybe I would have stayed in that situation, that I didn't have the support that I would have expected to receive because I over exceeded the expectations that people had of me in the first place. If you only expect an African American professor to come in, teach a few classes, help us with our diversity on our campus,
Mhm.
and then if that person goes above and beyond that, then that can be very intimidating to some people. And so, like everybody else, I got battle scars, and I
Hmm.
won't put all the dirty laundry out in public, but I'll
Right.
just say that those things were very telling because in my profession, especially, we are a profession that is supposed to be the folks that are advocating for others. I can
Right.
honestly tell you that even in my profession, some colleagues who are in a position to be influential and help many other people were the same people who turned the blind eye to some of the systematic racism that I experienced. And so, if it can happen in those scenarios, imagine what's happening in these boardrooms, imagining what's happening in these institutions and these opportunities when you just don't have the diversity or you only have one or two people there who may not be really expressing how people are truly feeling. So, a lot of my passion and fire to do the work I do comes from knowing what it feels like to not have somebody advocate for you when you needed an advocate.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Miller. Moving right along, 2020. Have you ever looked back? It's an old rap song. I don't know the exact words. I never seen a grown man cry, something like
Until
that.
yeah, I never seen a man cry till I seen that man die. Come on,
Right.
Scarface, stand up. Come on now, let's
There you
go.
go.
Let's
That's
do
it.
that.
That's
That's
it.
Come
our
on now.
era right there, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, have you ever looked back at your accomplishments, where you come from, and just cried?
Man,
Yeah.
I cry. Yes, the answer to your question is
Mm-hmm.
yes. I cry. I'll tell you when I cry. I mean, I don't cry all the time, but I cry enough. I cry at the birth of my sons. When
Hmm.
children are born, those are emotional moments.
Uh-huh.
I cry when close family members die and you are dealing with that sadness. And I cry when I think about where I have come. And I cry when I think about where I'm trying to go and the challenges that are still ahead of me in spite of how far I've come. Those are
Hmm.
the things that will bring in that vein of that Scarface. I never seen a man cry until I seen that man die, because we have to die daily, right? We have to die daily to the things that we've done, and we have to die daily sometimes to our own aspirations if they're not happening as fast as we want them to happen. So, my tears are tears like everybody else when I'm up late at night, or if I'm striving for this thing that I want to accomplish, or sometimes I'll even cry a little bit and shed a tear if I am being a little sulky and I'm feeling down. And I'll get a little sharp rebuke from the Lord, like, what you down about, boy? Don't you know I done gave you this? I gave you that. And so,
Hmm.
so I get them all, man. One time in particular, back in 2014, I remember not getting this thing I was going after, and it made me very mad. I was so angry that I went on my back porch. My wife was like, "Boy, you got to get out this house. Don't come back in this house until you are feeling better." And so
Hmm.
I went in the back porch and I cried and I was fussing at the Lord about stuff. And it's not very many times in my life that I will tell you I heard the voice of the Lord, but I heard the voice of the Lord that night. And this is what he told me. He said, "Jay, you sitting in this backyard crying and mad about why you didn't get this thing because of all of this stuff you did. But why you acting like you did it when it was me who did it? And so
Hmm.
until you get that right, you and me gonna have a problem."
Hmm.
And man, I'm telling you, that's changed my perspective on a lot of things now. Because all of this stuff that we got, our opportunities, our voices, even you brothers with the platform you have with this podcast,
Right.
it's God's podcast. He's just allowing you all to be the vessels to go ahead and do this thing.
That's
So,
right.
Right. Right.
trying to really embrace that part of the journey, this current part of the journey that, yes, we have our wants and desires and the things that are near and dear to us. I want us to, change the world and do better in the heart of this Black Lives Matter movement. But none of this stuff is going to drive itself. None of this stuff moves at all without God's hand in it, saying, yes, now's the time.
That's
So,
right.
again, brothers, yeah, man, but I be getting a little emotional sometimes.
Okay, good. Yeah,
We all
Mr.
do.
Mr. Small said, I want to ask Mr. Smalls a question. How many days a week you cry? I think you about a 4 or 5 day a week
Seven,
crier.
man. Seven.
Okay.
7 days
Yeah.
a week, man.
Yeah.
Especially with the responsibility with us, man, doing this podcast. And like we've said on other podcasts to different guests that we have invited to join us. This is 7 day a week process, man. It's just not the day that we wake up and say, okay, we're gonna do a podcast and then have everything together. When one podcast ends, we already preparing for the next. And every podcast is different. In perspective is how that person's personality is going to be, what kind of questions we're going to ask them, what kind of person they are, period. Um, and to It's a blessing to be on a podcast to where everybody that comes here, tells us that, hey, y'all doing a good job, keep pushing, man. And like you say, man, it's God plan, man. It's
Yeah,
not
no
us.
doubt.
We just fulfilling the plan, man, that Lee came up with, man. And I love to tell that story because it's a testimony that he just woke up one morning and he said, hey, man, let's do a podcast. And I was like, okay. And here we are. You know what I'm saying? And it's a blessing.
That's right.
Everything else is history, brother. Else is history.
Yeah, man.
He didn't believe me. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jay.
Well, I was just going to say I'm proud of you, brothers, man. So let me
No,
join
thank
the
you.
chorus, right? So I
Yeah.
would just encourage you all to continue to use your platform, use your voice, and I can just say this real quick: God's record is undefeated, man. God's undefeated. So,
Yeah.
Right.
so if God's going to bless this work, and I truly believe He is, man, sure, I'll just pray right now and that Father continue to bless this podcast so that not only can we have these conversations with the concept of under the tree, because even that under the tree, it has a lot of the under the tree moniker is interesting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because depending on who you are and what tree you're talking about,
Yeah.
that tree might be considered the drinking tree. It
Yeah.
might be considered the dummy tree,
Yeah.
or it could be considered a tree that is the authentic tree, right? This
Yeah.
Right.
idea where you can come under the tree, sit under the shade.
Yeah.
It's hot around us. We
Yeah.
want to sit under the shade real quick and have a conversation as
Yeah.
brothers and sisters. And so I applaud you, gentlemen, for that. And
Appreciate it, man.
I'm big on identity politics. And so you claim your own identity. You make your identity what you accept it to be. And so
That's
you
right.
guys are empowering the under the tree concept, man. So I appreciate that.
The reason why we created this platform, especially in my era, you couldn't really talk. You were raised keep your mouth shut, keep it
Right.
moving. And I met a lot of African American males had no communication skills because all you know is do your chores, shut up, go to school, don't ask your parents any questions.
And
And
that's still
yeah,
happening today. Though think
yeah,
about it.
yeah, yeah,
LeBron James for all his
yeah,
impact. I love LeBron. I love the way that he uses his impact because he refuses to shut up and dribble. right?
Right.
And
Right.
there's a lot of not controversy, but let's
Mm-hmm.
just say a certain political pundit person was a couple years ago when he was making some statements that didn't align with
Mm-hmm.
their values, and I won't
Mm-hmm.
even give that person name recognition. But
Mm-hmm.
if you look up "Shut Up and Dribble," you know who I'm talking about. But
Mm-hmm.
the whole idea was, we know that you a great basketball player and all, but stay in your lane.
All
And
right.
so, how often as black men are we told stay in our lane?
Yeah.
We're having this conversation a few days before Father's Day, and so one of the things that I'm trying to do as a father is let my boys know early. I'm going to affirm you. I'm going to give you opportunity. You got to learn your place, but I
Right.
will
Mm-hmm.
always make sure that you know that you are more than what people see your ability as.
Right.
You
Mm-hmm.
are more than just this X thing. So this idea of brothers being told to sit down and shut up,
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff is institutionalized as far as
Yeah.
how black men are trained early.
Yeah.
Because if we do speak, we can't be a threat. Y'all remember that scene from Bad Boys, right? Bad Boys 1.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Martin and Will Smith are knocking on the door, and then
Mhm.
Will Smith knocked on the door a little too hard, and Martin was like, "Hey man, you can't say it like that. You got too much bass in your voice. You got to say, 'Can I borrow some
Yeah.
brown sugar?'" It's the whole
Yeah.
idea that we
Yeah.
have to soften or lessen ourselves to be palatable. We will never be the kings we're supposed to be if the only way we can gain entry into any conversation is if our voices are lowered, and then we are in some type of way already marginalized before we even open our mouth. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so again, brothers, thank you all for your platform.
You got to have an open dialogue, man. It's always healthy, man, amongst us to have an open dialogue to where you can voice your opinions and nobody going to lash back at you and say, "Hey, your opinions don't align with mine."
Right.
Well, even though our opinions may not align with each other, we still have the right to it. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
no doubt.
Another thing I want to bring up, you were at downtown at a rally. I call it a rally.
Yeah.
And I've seen the video. You said something about the NAACP. Don't just show up when the video's shooting. You,
Yeah. Hold on, so let me duck real quick. Look.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Look.
You said it. I mean, that's why I'm bringing it up. So I never seen you harden the paint like that. And I say, my
Well,
God, Jay, strike a match.
well, okay. By the way, so let me clear the air right now. So for
Mm-hmm.
anybody watch this podcast, I got number love for the NAACP, and I
Right.
respect a lot of work that's done. And I
Mm-hmm.
also shout out to 100. Now, clearly, anybody who knows me know that I'm a big supporter of the 100 Black Men.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I particularly called out that organization, only because that's a part of my history, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been a part of 100, and
Mm-hmm.
I did that work for a long time. But
Right.
when you get behind the scenes, I do challenge a lot of our mainstay organizations that I don't know if, and there's always been this tension in eras. What we're dealing with right now, not anything new. Even during the civil rights era, there were tensions between different groups as far as how did we best communicate the message. Some
Mm-hmm.
people thought it was best to be over polished. Other people thought it was best to maybe shake some stuff up. What I think we lose if we don't learn the lesson from the civil rights era, that just doing it in a polished way won't get it done. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I liked about last Saturday's rally, and why I was glad to go do it, is because it was organized by, I thought, local folk, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
people who
Mm-hmm.
wanted to come together and let their voices be heard. And so in that speech where I asked the question. And by the way, I asked the question not
Mm-hmm.
knowing what the answer was going to be for the crowd. I did ask the question, is the
Mm-hmm.
NAACP here? I didn't hear a response.
Mm-hmm.
So in not hearing a response, I then went further. But what I was trying to do was just shake it up and even try to motivate the crowd to know that we can't wait on our savior as a community, right? I mean, we can't wait on a group or organization. I hear so many people say, as a community, we're lacking because we're waiting for our next leader.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, we're seeing it's not like in America in 2020, we don't have African American mayors, we don't have African American people who are politicians in both sides, both political parties, all across. We've had people in high places, but we're not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily seeing the trickle down effect in terms of how it helps our most vulnerable communities. And so at the end of the day, me putting a little bit of heat, a little bit of side shade toward those two groups was more so for the crowd to encourage them as opposed to just being against knocking those groups. But yeah, I'm not a big fan when people come out only when it's a event that's nice and polished and shiny, and then you're going to have media there, and then you see people come up and say we're all about it, because I should be able to see the fingerprints of your work. If anybody want to come for me, you can see my receipts. I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. I've been doing this work for almost 20 years, and my receipts are widely available publicly for where you can see in
Right.
terms of a long line of people who you might see and many others who you will never know that I've helped personally in trying to do it. Until we say as a community that we're going to take that energy and mentor and shape and develop the next future without expecting something back, we're
Mm-hmm.
never going to win. And so my challenge to mentors, whether it be senior leaders, if I'm doing a corporate training, or whether it be young people, is if we're not doing this mentoring thing right, we always lose. But some people don't play by we. Some people play by me.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, my challenge to everybody is, those groups included, please reach back and talk to the kids who are the 13, 14-year-olds now, who not some connected person's kid. Talk to that kid now who just a J, who just a
Mm-hmm.
kid, a brother Smalls, growing
Right.
up, who got a
Mm-hmm.
good heart. But if you assume, remember what I said earlier about low expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If your expectations for a community are low and you don't think that's where you got diamonds in the rough, then you never even go till that land. And if you don't
Mm-hmm.
till that land, then you never gonna find the next person that could be great. So again, I'm not sure how mature we are as a community to where when we're ready to honestly say as a community of people,
Mm-hmm.
we demand something different. So that's
That's
why I
right.
called them out a little bit.
Right.
All three of us have seen the video of Mr. George Floyd,
Yeah,
national TV. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to touch on that. Do you think it was straight murder? Because the cop that had his knee on the neck, it looked like he was in a zone to me, like a trance, you know.
I think that we won't know for a good while all of the details and the depths of that,
Mm-hmm.
as far as the symbolism of it, the nonchalant way that his hand was in his pocket,
Mm-hmm.
whether that was intentional or not intentional. Nowadays, we live in an era of, it's not what you see, it's the meaning behind what you see.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've seen in recent days even some stuff from our commander in chief in terms of some campaign symbolism. All of
Mm-hmm.
this stuff that's in plain sight, but not really, right? So I'm only saying that as backdrop to say I am not convinced that there aren't all kind of reasons that we may never know for quite some time that went into the actions that happened in that day. I'm sorry, of course, obviously that Mr. Floyd lost his life,
Mm-hmm.
and I hate that for anybody. I think the reaction that you're seeing from so many is that we remember as kids, since we weren't old enough at the time, we learned that the Emmett Till murder and lynching and the open casket really got America's attention
Mm-hmm.
to the troubles and the scourge of racism, because people could always say it ain't as bad as it look. So for years we've been talking about many African Americans, people fighting for social justice. For years we've been talking about police injustice, police brutality. Unfortunately, George Floyd's murder that we saw on live tape
Mm-hmm.
is the mutation, not mutation, what do they call it? The evolution. It's the
Mm-hmm.
evolution of what we saw 25 years ago with Rodney King.
Mm-hmm.
25 years ago, Rodney King, we saw a bunch of police officers whoop a man with sticks with cameras on, and those
Right.
men were freed. And when
Mm-hmm.
those men went free, that then set off this belief and policy that police were untouchable. And so our community had been hurting, but even though we had been sharing our hurt with many people, since I've already mentioned, people tell black men to sit down and shut up.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not that the police are bad. It's that y'all commit too many crimes. It's not that we got a school to prison pipeline problem. It's that y'all ain't serious. Y'all ain't helping y'all community. Shut
Mm-hmm.
up, shut up, shut up, shut up and dribble. Sit down somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see something as violent as what happens when you see the life seep out of George Floyd, and when, as I said during the speech, as he's going over to the other side of glory and he's calling out to his mama,
Mm-hmm.
and he's literally calling and pleading for his life, what we saw was a modern day lynching. We
Yes.
saw a modern day lynching. And when you see something like that, there is no going back. When you see something like that, it should motivate you to get your behind up off your seat, go do something, join something. Even if you're not the type of person that say, I'm going to be about marching and rallying, then damn it, I need you to go mentor 10 people right
Mm-hmm.
now. I need
Mm-hmm.
you to go find 10 kids right now and make sure that they got your number in their phone so that if they need you for something, they can call you. But
Yes, sir.
again, that's a level of accountability that goes well beyond, and it's my prayer that it don't get lost in everything, because a lot of times our movements get co-opted by other forces.
Oh
I
yeah.
just I just hope that in this case with Brother
Definitely.
Floyd and Miss Taylor, and in many respects, even though it wasn't by the hands of law enforcement, Ahmaud Arbery's death,
Yeah.
all of
Right.
these deaths showed that there is a violent reaction to the perception of blacks in 2020 still. For
Yeah.
regardless of what the reason is, if you were someone who likes to deny systemic racism, then here's your, I'm not even going to talk to you about systemic racism. I'm just going to talk to you about what are the perceptions and images of black people that you see us as so threatening, so violent, so intimidating that taking our life is easy. And
Yeah.
until we
Right.
get to the point to where taking our life is something that isn't deemed as something that is so easy, then we're not going to win. So I pray that that changes very soon.
Definitely.
I'm
Definitely.
I'm going to speed it up 4 years in the future. I'm going to throw this little ticker on the screen, and I'm going to catch you off guard with this. But I think you need to, think about it. And here you go.
What?
Hey, you don't need
Oh,
an experience, or you don't.
oh, hold on a second. Who's running for president?
You.
Whoa! Man, I need security. I don't got enough security yet. I
The
need
doctor.
security. Now, let me
The
quit.
doctor.
No, listen, brothers. Okay, truth be told, right?
Mhm.
Here's what I'll say. I'll say the same thing that I say when I get first of all, I'm flattered. Thank you, brothers, for that.
All
It's
right.
it's a
Right.
it's a compliment and I appreciate it.
All right.
But I will say this, nothing in my history would say that I'm nowhere near 4 years being ready for presidential run, only because, in politics you need people.
All
And
right.
so throughout my life, God has separated me, and I'm thankful that He separated me. I'm believing and trusting that He separated me for a purpose. And when the time is right, He'll reveal that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, though, I will answer your question about a presidential run the same way I answer questions about when people ask me if I'm a pastor. I get asked
Okay.
this question all the time. Even last week after my speech was over, there were these nice women from Charleston. I hope they're watching the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me who I was, and I told them, and they was like, "Oh, you from Columbia?" Because I sure was going to ask you what church you attend, because I was going to come see your service. Like it was this, and I've heard versions of that for years. What I
Mm-hmm.
used to say is, "No, I'm not called." Well, I'm gonna stop saying that. And I've been stopped saying that for a while now. And now what I say is, I'm not saying God ain't calling me. I just ain't answered the phone yet,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so whatever
Right.
God is calling me to do, I'm not going to say no because
Mhm.
my sons are worth it. Your sons are worth it. Our
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
daughters are worth it. Our families are worth it.
Yep.
I'm blessed to be somebody who I think got some good ideas, but
Mm-hmm.
just know that power corrupts people. And unfortunately, I've learned in my experience that even when there have been situations where you've been in the right, when people are not, uh, political rivals have a way of wanting to get rid of you if they
Mm-hmm.
see you as competition.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So my whole thing is whenever God says so. So if y'all want to start a campaign and do a little write-in, man, I will accept it. All right, but just know it. I would love to do it, and honestly, I'm not going to say no. I'm just going to say it would certainly be a move of God for it to happen, and I serve a God that can do all things. And so if He say let's ride, then let's roll.
I
Do you
heard
think
that.
you're going to do any more rallies? Everything seems like it's kind of quieted down right now. You're just going to push the agenda from afar.
No, no, no. I'm still actively trying to. My follow up from last week is, and we need to maintain the momentum. We good about not we're good about, but traditionally what's
Mm-hmm.
happened is attention gets put on our issue. We
Mm-hmm.
have the rally, we get the support, people are fired up about it, but then
Mm-hmm.
over time our momentum just goes down. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm pushing the momentum. I'm encouraging people to continue to rally. I encouraged the crowd last week to continue to do it, and I'm still working with the organizer who put that event together, encouraging her to do other events. And so, no, yes, I am still very much active and wanting to be a participant and
Mm-hmm.
helping. I'm still writing and trying to let my voice be heard on all my different platforms. And of course, as a professor, when we talk about the work about Black Lives Mattering, we can't talk about Black Lives Matter until we talk about all of the wealth gap inequalities that we have in our community. So
Mm-hmm.
African Americans still, we it's not that we don't have people who are successful, but we have the gap in between those who are successful and those who aren't successful is still far too wide among blacks as a group and between groups, between races, between blacks and whites especially. So I'm motivated to do everything I can to help empower people. And the number one thing that I know can work is through education. So that's how I push and lead and try to give a good track record.
Right. It's a coworker of mine. It wasn't a racist conversation. He's not a racist dude, white guy. We just had a real conversation.
Right.
And he said, "Explain to me what white privilege is." He keep hearing the term white privilege. So I brought it from an old school way.
Okay.
I said when you ride down the highway, no matter what street you on, major intersection, just start counting at the businesses and major institutions and establishments. And I want you to do this. When you count, say white, 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 white. And he didn't understand where I was coming from, but I explained it to him. I said, think about it. The slaves were approximately freed 1865, so you had nothing. You owned nothing. So the generational wealth came from, the Caucasians. So now you understand what I'm saying. When you count all the businesses, all the stores are owned by pretty much Caucasian, individuals. So when people say white privilege, that's probably where it's coming from. When you start counting and riding down the highway, all the major banks, everything, it comes from the 1800s. And what the first slaves came approximately, what, 16
16,
something?
16, 19.
Yeah,
Let,
around
let,
that.
let,
Yeah.
if I may
Go
for a
ahead.
second,
Go
can I
ahead.
give you a
Yeah.
professor?
Hmm.
Can I give you can I give you something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Preach,
When I
preach.
talk about privilege, privilege is what the word says it is, but talking
Hmm.
about privilege is always going to be what I call a butt pucker
Hmm.
conversation for some people,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? It's going to be a tighten up the butt conversation
Hmm.
because if you are from a position of privilege,
Hmm.
you can't see privilege as
Hmm.
anything because you don't feel as though nobody gave you anything,
Hmm.
right? So many people don't see privilege or don't understand privilege, or they
Hmm.
see it as an attack
Right.
as opposed to thinking about what privilege details. And so
Hmm.
privilege is not having to worry about blank. Like that's privilege if we want to be real plain about it. So
Hmm.
if I'm riding in my car and I'm in a neighborhood or a community and I don't have to worry about am I a minority? I
Hmm.
don't have to worry about will my rights be bothered here?
Hmm.
I don't have to worry about will I have access to what I need here? I
Mm-hmm.
won't have to worry about if I go to Walmart or go to Dollar General, will my hair products be locked up somewhere because they're afraid my people gonna steal it.
Hmm.
The privilege just
Hmm.
go in there and grab some Head and Shoulders, as
Hmm.
opposed to having to get the what we use, y'all. Just for me, Dax.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm
Yes.
bald, man.
Yes.
I
Yeah,
don't do
Yes.
hair.
yeah,
Yes.
Okay, whatever.
Yes.
I used to have waves back in the day. Used to get some Dax, right?
Hmm.
But I remember
Hmm.
going to the store to get my Dax. The Dax was always in the lock section
Hmm.
because there was this kind of implied thing that came along with people who just happen to look like me from my community. So
Hmm.
privilege is when you really boil it down. Privilege is the things that you may not have to worry about that somebody else worries about.
Right.
yeah,
And so when
yeah.
it comes down, when I'm really trying to just break privilege down, one of the things that I've been doing for years now is I occasionally do trainings for police departments on racial
Hmm.
reconciliation. And so
Hmm.
if I'm talking to a police department about racial issues, many departments and officers I'm talking to may be white. In a lot of these categories, these are not necessarily bad guys. They
Hmm.
may have just really never had somebody break down and talk to them about what privilege is in a non-threatening way so that they can understand why, yes, people should see them as people who are there to help, but if in their community they've seen so many bad things happen, that's why you may be getting the reaction you're getting to. And
Hmm.
if you don't have to worry about that and other people do, that in itself is a privilege. So
Hmm.
again, that's I just want to give that to you because as people get lost in systems, because systems are big, but individualisms, right? A bunch of individuals make up institutions. Institutions over time make up systems. So
Right.
when you think about systematic racism, it's what happens over time. If
Right.
an act of discrimination happens to you and it's individual discrimination, and then you try to go sue that company, that company may have an institutional policy that might be protected by a law, and that law was put together by people who maybe not look like you and me. And so even if I wanted to sue and there are limits to the law for how much I can sue, that's a systematic racism protecting the individual racism that protected somebody's individual discrimination. So that's how systems and institutions work to affect individuals, and it's a heavy game.
Wow. That's pretty.
Wow.
That's pretty deep right there. You broke it down.
Yeah, I like how you broke that down, man. Wow.
I
Yeah.
just
You
try to
broke.
make it bite sized, man, because see, when we think about the not that think about it, I give nobody a pause. No passes are given. All of
Hmm.
my passes that I gave before, I'm revoking them now that we live in this new post George Floyd world, right? Because the consequences are too severe to have all of these passes out there when we don't talk about issues of racism.
Hmm.
As somebody in higher ed, I know throughout my career, I will do everything I can to not just get people to say that they are not racist. I want people to embrace being actively
Hmm.
anti-racist.
Hmm.
There's a difference
Mm-hmm.
between being, well, I'm not racist. I have people of X group, and then saying, no, I'm actively anti-racist. I point out racism when I see it. I do everything I can to challenge it, and I try to make the world free from it until we get to where all of the people right now who are allies and supporters, I appreciate the support. I will appreciate that support more when it goes beyond the hashtag, beyond the comment, and it goes
Right.
into actively being anti-racist.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody is making a decision about who's going to get the job, and you realize that there's not one black candidate in the pool, I need
Hmm.
somebody to actively say, why don't we have any African Americans in here? Let's go out and do everything we can to make sure that we find somebody who's qualified because I know they're out there. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
actively anti-racist. And that's going to take some time.
Yeah. This was a very fruitful conversation, gentlemen. I loved everything, and That's what talking under the tree is all about, man. We
I hope I
enjoy
didn't bore you, brothers, man.
No,
I
Man,
hope it was fitting to what you
we,
all
we
are
was
doing.
tuned in, man. We learned a lot tonight, man. We learned a lot. We was fellowshipping, man. I love the fellowship.
Well, I appreciate the love, guys, and I thank you all for inviting me on. And I'm not hard to find. If anybody want to reach out to me, I can be found online through my company, Miller Ignites Consulting.
Mhm.
And you just spell out the word Miller Ignites, because when we were putting that company together back in 2016, my wife and I prayed about it and said, if you're going to do something like this, what do you want to do? We want to be a light to the world. So when you ignite something, you light it, right? So
Right.
Miller
That's right.
Ignites.
That's
So
right.
that's where Miller Ignites was born, and that's been pretty fruitful. And of course, you can find me through my institution's website as well. And I'm available on all the different platforms: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So look me up.
Yeah, we're going to close out in prayer, and Doc, I'll give you the honors to do it tonight.
Oh, thank you, brothers. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to say thank you. I thank you for this conversation. Lord, I thank you for what you're doing in this world right now, because, as your word says in Ephesians, faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And so, God, as we move forward, we just pray, Lord, that throughout all of the different crises going on right now, the coronavirus, racism, dealing with selfishness in the world and not thinking about the common good. We just ask, Father, that you come in right now and you bind the hands of the enemy in the ways and where we are not coming together, and that you point us all together for your glory, not for individual gain, not for my rights or what I want to do, but for your glory, for the greatest of us. And so, Father, we ask you all of these things, and we pray and believe with expectation that we know you can do it. And we thank you for being a mighty, trustworthy, and just God. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen.
I'm gonna ask you a question off the record, Mr. Miller. Do you still eat eggs and rice? I'm gonna see if you still
Oh,
got
yes,
your
I
roots.
do. Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I just had some eggs and rice the other day. I'm doing a little bit of a low carb thing right now. So eggs and rice, brown rice used to be white
Okay.
rice, brown rice now. A little bit of eggs and rice, and it's I got a little low country recipe we can talk about offline.
Man,
Yeah.
you say low country, man. If you from the low country, you know about that eggs and rice.
Oh, absolutely, no, but the eggs and rice.
Thanks
Brothers,
for
peace.
listening to Let's Talk Under the Tree. I'm Mr. Palmer. Dr. Miller, T. Smalls in the house, Moncks Corner, South
Right.
Carolina, 843
Stand up.
Kitfield Road, Berkeley High School. I'm going to check them records and see if y'all won them football championships.
94, 96.
94, 96.
Yeah, we nice.
Yeah. What position did you play?
I played defensive line. I played all over, man.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. And y'all have a nice night, and Under the Tree loves everybody. We love y'all.
Peace.
All right, peace.